The wind moved softly through the narrow street where the last light of evening faded upon the cracked walls and tired windows, and in that fading glow stood a girl whose eyes held more silence than any word could ever carry. She had come back after years of distance and dreams, after promises that were never spoken but always felt, and as she looked at the house before her, the house that had once known laughter, she felt the weight of time pressing gently upon her heart. Every corner of her memory whispered like a voice without sound, calling her back into the shadows she had once called home. Inside that house once there was a boy who believed that silence could heal and that words were too heavy to be trusted. He had been her friend, her shadow, her quiet reason. When the world grew too loud, they would sit by the old tree behind the house and let the wind talk for them. The silence between them had never been empty. It was filled with meaning, with unsaid feelings, with the kind of understanding that does not need names. But one day the silence changed. It became colder, sharper. Something unspoken turned into distance, and before either of them could stop it, the space between their hearts became an echo. Years passed like leaves carried away by unseen rivers, and she traveled far trying to escape the memory of that echo. Yet no matter where she went, the silence followed her. In the hum of trains, in the whispers of cities, in the stillness of nights, she would find him there, not as a face but as a feeling, a presence that spoke without sound. When she closed her eyes, she could still feel the warmth of the afternoons they spent sitting side by side, saying nothing and yet saying everything. When she finally returned, the town had changed, the streets smaller, the sky quieter, the people slower, but the silence still lived there just as she remembered it. She walked through the market where voices tangled like threads of forgotten songs, and yet even in the noise she heard it, the familiar quiet that once held her soul. She moved past the corner where the bakery used to be, past the bench where he had once written her name in dust, and smiled though he never said why, and with each step she took the silence grew stronger, as if leading her toward something she was meant to face. She stopped before the gate of that old house, the one that had once been filled with the scent of tea and the sound of laughter. Now it was just walls and air and memory. She pushed the gate gently and it creaked as though remembering her touch. She stepped inside, her heart trembling but her face calm. She could feel the dust of years rise around her and the light through the windows drawing lines on the floor like forgotten verses. She walked through the empty rooms, touching the wooden frames, tracing the shapes of what once was. She could almost see them again, the moments they had shared, the quiet glances, the half smiles, the time when silence had been enough. But now it spoke differently. Now it spoke of everything that was lost, of everything left unsaid. And as she reached the back door and stepped into the garden, the air grew softer. The tree still stood there, old and weary yet alive, and when she saw it she felt tears pressing behind her eyes. For here beneath this tree they had once made promises in silence, promises of always and forever, promises that needed no sound because their hearts had already spoken. The garden smelled of earth and rain and ghosts of spring. She walked closer and her hand brushed the bark of the tree where faint carvings still lingered, their initials worn by time and weather. She smiled through her trembling silence and whispered, though the air did not need her words, it already knew. And for a moment she felt him there beside her, unseen but near, the silence between them alive again. But this time it was heavier. It spoke of longing, of regret, of the quiet truth that some distances are not measured in miles but in moments that can never return. Night unfolded slowly around her like a secret waiting to be remembered, and she sat beneath the old tree feeling the cool soil beneath her fingers as if the earth itself held the echoes of their past. The air carried the faint scent of jasmine drifting from somewhere beyond the walls, and she closed her eyes, letting the silence wrap around her like a forgotten melody. Her mind wandered to that day long ago when the world had been golden and the sun had rested softly on his face. He had looked at her then with eyes that spoke more than any words ever could, and she had understood, though he said nothing, that he was trying to tell her everything. But life had its own way of turning whispers into distance, and one morning he was simply gone, leaving behind a note that said nothing at all, just a blank page folded in half and placed beneath the window where the light used to fall. She had stared at it for hours, waiting for meaning to appear, for words to rise like waves from that empty page, but there was only stillness and a hollow ache that settled deep inside her chest. And from that day on she had learned to speak with silence too, for silence was all that was left to her. As she grew older she learned that silence was not emptiness, it was truth unspoken, it was pain hidden beneath calm smiles, it was love too deep for language. And sometimes when she looked at strangers in the city she wondered how many of them were carrying silences of their own, how many hearts beat with words they could never say, and it made her feel less alone and yet more lost all at once. The moon rose higher above the garden, casting silver threads of light through the branches, and she thought she saw movement by the gate, a shadow soft and slow, and for a heartbeat she forgot to breathe. Her heart stumbled against her ribs as she whispered his name, though no sound came from her lips. The air seemed to listen and respond, and in that moment she knew that even if he were gone, even if he had become only memory, the silence between them would always bring him back. She walked toward the gate, every step careful, as though the ground might vanish if she rushed, and when she reached it there was no one there, only the wind moving through the trees, and yet she could feel it, the presence she had known since forever, the familiar quiet that once filled the spaces between their hearts. She leaned against the gate, her eyes closed, her breath steady, and in that silence she began to hear things she had never noticed before: the heartbeat of the earth, the sigh of leaves, the unspoken forgiveness that time had been trying to give her. She realized then that perhaps he had not left to escape her, perhaps he had gone to protect her from the noise that surrounded their small world, perhaps his silence had been his way of loving her without breaking her. And though years had passed, the truth of that still lingered like a faint light at the edge of night. She remembered the way he used to sit beside her, never looking directly at her, but always knowing when she needed to be heard, even without words. She remembered the way he would listen to the sound of her breath and call it music without saying it, and now she understood that silence had always been their language. The stars grew brighter, the garden shimmered with silver and shadow, and she sat again beneath the tree, her hands folded in her lap and her eyes lifted to the sky. And it was then she realized that silence was not the absence of sound, it was the presence of everything that mattered. It was the way love continued to speak long after voices faded, and she let herself cry quietly, not from sadness but from the beauty of knowing that even after all this time silence still loved her. She stayed there until the first light of dawn touched the edge of the world and the air grew soft with morning. The tree whispered with the wind, and for the first time she felt at peace. She knew she would stay here for a while, not to wait, not to mourn, but to listen, because somewhere in the quiet she could still hear him, and she knew that the silence between them had never truly ended, it had only been waiting for her to return. Part 3. The morning light spread gently across the old walls, and soft rays slipped through the cracks, painting golden dust over her face. As she opened her eyes, the world felt new yet ancient, the silence no longer heavy but alive. She rose slowly, her hands brushing against the cool grass, and the earth seemed to hum beneath her feet, as if whispering that everything she had lost was still here, just changed. She walked through the garden one last time, her fingertips tracing the air, her heart calm in its quiet rhythm. She could feel him everywhere, in the warmth of the sunlight, in the hush of the leaves, in the spaces where the wind paused to breathe. The memories returned not as pain but as light. She saw herself as a girl again, sitting by the tree waiting for him to arrive. She saw the soft way he smiled when she looked away. She saw their shadows merge on the ground as the day slipped into twilight, and she understood that some connections never fade, they only transform into something unseen yet eternal. The silence between them had not been emptiness, it had been a bridge, a secret place where love could live without needing words. As she stood there, the air shimmered slightly, and for an instant she thought she saw him standing at the far end of the garden, his outline faint like smoke in morning light. She did not move, she did not blink, she only watched, and the figure smiled gently, that same quiet smile that had once steadied her soul. No words were spoken, none were needed, for the silence spoke louder than any farewell could. She felt the warmth of it flow through her, filling every hollow space that had once ached, and when she blinked again he was gone, but the peace remained. She turned toward the house and walked inside, each step soft like a memory breathing. She touched the walls as if to thank them for holding her past and her pain. She reached the window where once a folded blank page had waited for her, and there she found another. This time the paper was worn at the edges, yellowed by time, but the faint outline of a sentence had appeared. It was as if the silence had finally chosen to speak. She lifted it carefully, and though the words were faint she could feel them more than see them. It said, "I never left, the silence was my way of staying with you." She held the paper to her chest and smiled. The tears that came now were gentle, not from sorrow but from understanding. She whispered softly into the morning air, not to call him back but to let him go, with love and gratitude for everything the silence had given her. She stepped outside once more, the sun climbing higher, the world beginning to stir with voices and footsteps, and yet within her there was still that quiet, that eternal space where his memory lived. She knew that wherever life would take her she would carry this silence as a gift, not as an absence but as a truth. She walked down the street, leaving behind the old house, the tree, the garden, but not the feeling. The silence followed her gently like a shadow, but this time it was kind. It no longer hurt, it no longer asked to be understood, it simply existed beside her like an old friend. She moved through the town that was waking slowly. People greeted her with smiles, children ran past, laughter filling the air, and yet she could still hear him in the rhythm of life itself, his silence woven into the sounds of the world, reminding her that love never really fades, it only changes its voice. As she reached the edge of the town, she stopped for a moment, turning back to look one last time. The house stood still in the morning light, small and quiet, a part of her heart forever resting there. She breathed deeply, letting the silence fill her once more, and then she smiled, a soft knowing smile, the kind that only comes from those who have heard what silence truly says. And she walked forward into the new day, her steps steady, her heart open, and behind her the silence spoke again, not in sorrow but in peace, in love, in the gentle language that had always been theirs. And in that moment where sound met stillness, the world seemed to pause to listen, and for the first time in forever she knew she was home, not in a place, not in a person, but in the silence that had loved her all along.